December 2, 2022. Palmdale, California. The high desert of the Antelope Valley is a place where the wind carries the scent of sagebrush and the ghosts of mock-breaking secrets. Outside Air Force Plant 42, the air is crisp, biting with a winter chill that settles deep into the marrow. Inside the cavernous shadows of Hangar 42, the atmosphere is different. It is thick with the electric hum of anticipation, the faint, ozone-sharp smell of advanced polymer coatings, and the bone-deep vibration of a crowd holding its collective breath. Thousands of eyes are fixed on a pair of massive, reinforced doors, waiting for a revelation that has been decades in the making. Standing near the front of the stage, his boots polished to a mirror sheen, is Chief Master Sergeant Robert Henderson. A man who has spent 30 years in the belly of the beast, maintaining the giants of the Global Strike Command. Henderson knows the weight of American metal better than anyone. He has touched the skin of the B-22, a relic of iron and fire, and climbed the ladders of the B-2, the bat-winged ghost of the 90s. But tonight, as he stares at the blue-tinted floodlights reflecting off the hangar floor, he feels a strange, unfamiliar tension. He isn't just looking at a new airframe, he is looking at the survival of the American promise. The irony was thick enough to choke on. For a decade, the experts in ivory towers and foreign capitals had been writing the obituary of the heavy bomber. They claimed that in an era of hypersonic missiles and satellite arrays that could read a license plate from orbit, a massive subsonic wing was nothing more than a high-priced target. They called it a billion-dollar shadow, a vanity project for a bygone era of warfare. To the strategists in Beijing and Moscow, the American bomber fleet was a dinosaur waiting for the asteroid. They believed they had solved the problem of the sky. Then, the music stopped. The deep, resonant chords of the national anthem faded into the desert wind, and the hangar doors began their agonizingly slow crawl apart. As the slit of darkness widened, a shape emerged that defied the human eye's ability to process depth. It was white, not the charcoal black of the B-2, but a spectral, ghostly gray that seemed to absorb the very light that tried to define it. It didn't look like a machine built by men, it looked like a tear in the fabric of reality itself. This was the B-21 Raider. And it was at this moment that the pullback began to reveal a terrifying truth for the rest of the world. This wasn't just a plane. It was a digital predator, a lethal node in a global web of sensors, designed to do the one thing the critics said was impossible: vanish in plain sight. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have grasped in their arrogance, was that America hadn't just built a better bomber. We had rewritten the laws of the electromagnetic spectrum. You see, most people think of a stealth bomber as a shield, something that hides. But for men like Henderson, the B-21 is a sword. A sword that doesn't just strike, it lingers. While the critics argued that satellites would find the shadow, the engineers at Northrop Grumman were busy making sure there was no shadow to find. They were integrating open architecture, a fancy term for a brain that grows faster than the enemy can learn. They built a ghost that doesn't just visit the target, it owns the target. As the B-21 rolled forward, its sleek, windowless-looking cockpit catching the glare of the flashbulbs, the silence in the hangar was deafening. It was the silence of a predator that knows it is the only thing in the woods with claws. The world had spent 20 years building walls of radar and nets of satellites, convinced they had finally fenced in the American eagle. But as the Raider stood there, bathed in the patriotic glow of the California night, it became clear, those walls were made of paper. And the fire was already inside. This was the moment the world realized that when America decides to disappear, it doesn't leave. It just waits. The weight of that realization is what keeps the peace. It is the silent, hovering presence over a distant horizon that whispers a simple, terrifying message to anyone who would dare challenge the flag. We are already here. You just haven't been invited to see us yet. To understand how the B-21 Raider became the most feared ghost in the American arsenal, you have to look back at the late 2000s. A time when the Pentagon was haunted by a very specific kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of an old-fashioned dogfight or a massive tank battle across the plains of Europe. It was the fear of a wall. A digital, invisible, and incredibly lethal wall known as a 2/AD, anti-access/area denial. For decades, the United States had enjoyed what generals calls permissive environments. We could fly our tankers, our radar planes, and our fighters almost anywhere we wanted because the enemy sensors were relics of the Cold War. But by 2010, the Great Wall wasn't just a metaphor in China, it was a reality built of S-400 missile batteries, quantum computing radars, and satellites that could track an aircraft by the heat of its engines. The world was closing its doors to the American eagle, and for the first time since 1945. There was a real chance we could be locked out of the fight before it even began. General Timothy Ray, the former head of Air Force Global Strike Command, sat in his office at Barksdale Air Force Base. looking at a fleet that was quite literally aging out of the sky. He had the B-52 Stratofortress, a magnificent iron dinosaur that was older than the pilots flying it. He had the B-1 Lancer, a supersonic thoroughbred that was being run into the ground by 20 years of low-altitude desert combat. And he had the B-2 Spirit, the legendary stealth bomber. The B-2 was a masterpiece. But with only 20 aircraft in existence and a maintenance schedule that required climate-controlled hangars for every single hour of flight. It was a boutique weapon. It was too precious to lose, yet too rare to truly dominate. What they didn't know back then, what the critics in Washington and the planners in Beijing failed to grasp, was that the Air Force wasn't looking for a replacement. They were looking for a revolution. But the doubt was everywhere. You see, the modern era of warfare had become obsessed with the drone solution. Politicians and tech moguls argued that the age of the heavy manned bomber was over. Why risk a billion-dollar plane and 2 human lives when you could send a swarm of $1,000 drones? They called the new bomber project the Long-Range Strike Bomber LRSB, but in the hallways of the Capitol, it was mocked as the billion-dollar shadow. Critics claimed that by the time the first plane rolled off the assembly line, modern radar would have rendered stealth obsolete. They argued that a plane that could be tracked by a constellation of low-Earth orbit satellites was nothing more than a flying coffin. This was the irony of the situation. The very people who claimed precision warfare had replaced the need for heavy bombers were the ones making the heavy bomber necessary. You can have the most precise missile in the world, but if you can't get within 500 miles of the target to launch it, that missile is just an expensive lawn ornament. America was facing a tactical dead end. Our enemies were building bubbles of protection that our current fighters couldn't penetrate and stay in. If a conflict broke out in the Pacific, a B-52 would be seen from 1,000 miles away. An F-35 didn't have the range to reach the target without a tanker, and a tanker is just a giant bullseye for a long-range missile. We needed a ghost that could stay in the room. A ghost that didn't just strike and leave, but one that could loiter, listen, and dismantle the enemy's entire network from the inside out. The truth was, the problem no one wanted to solve wasn't just how to build a stealthy plane. It was how to build a plane that could survive in an environment where everything, the air itself, the satellites above, and the sensors below, was designed to kill it. The LRSB program was shrouded in a level of secrecy that rivaled the Manhattan Project. While the public debated the cost and the critics laughed at the idea of another expensive flying wing, a small group of engineers at Northrop Grumman and the Air Force's Rapid Capabilities Office were working on a mechanism that would serve as the ultimate metaphor for American resilience. They weren't just focusing on the shape of the plane, they were focusing on the spectral nature of it. Most people think stealth means the plane disappears from a radar screen. It doesn't. In the old days, stealth meant being a black hole in the sky. But the B-21 was designed to be something much more subtle. It was designed to be spectral stealth, integrating the aircraft into the background noise of the universe. It wasn't about hiding from the radar, it was about convincing the radar that the B-21 was just a breeze, a bird, or a glitch in the software. But before the first piece of composite skin could be laid, they had to prove the concept. They had to battle the doubt that the very idea of a bomber was a relic of a primitive time. In the silence of the classified briefing rooms, the generals stood their ground. They knew that when the first shot is fired, you don't want a billion-dollar shadow that disappears when the sun comes up. You want a guardian that stays in the sky until the job is done. America was about to stop chasing the technology of the future and start building the physics that would define it. The world thought we were building a plane. We were actually building a message. There is nowhere you can hide where we cannot reach out and touch you. The birthplace of the B-21 Raider wasn't a hangar floor covered in blueprints and aluminum shavings. It was a digital universe. To understand how we built the world's first sixth-generation aircraft, you have to look at the work of people like Dr. Elena Vance, a lead systems architect whose office at Northrop Grumman wasn't filled with wrenches, but with servers that pulsed with the heat of 1 billion calculations per second. In the old days of the Cold War, building a bomber like the B-52 was a matter of brutal geometry and raw horsepower. You drew the lines, built a prototype, and then spent years, sometimes decades, fixing the mistakes that only revealed themselves at 40,000 feet. But the Raider was different. It was the first digital native of the U.S. Air Force. What they didn't know outside the secure vaults of Palmdale was that the B-21 had already flown millions of hours before a single bolt was tightened. The engineers used what they call a digital twin, a perfect, line-for-line, atom-for-atom digital replica of the aircraft. Every wire, every hydraulic line, and every line of code was simulated in a virtual wind tunnel so advanced it could predict the turbulence caused by a single rivet. This was the engineering revelation that changed everything. Most people think of a plane as a finished product, like a car you buy off a lot. But Dr. Vance and her team realized that in the 21st century, hardware is just the skin. The software is the soul. They integrated something called open architecture. You see, the biggest problem with stealth planes of the past, like the B-2, was that they were frozen in time. If the enemy developed a new radar, it could take 10 years and $5 billion to upgrade the plane's electronics to counter it. The B-21 was built to be different. Its computer brain is modular, like a smartphone. If a new threat emerges on a Tuesday, the Air Force can push a software update on Wednesday, and by Thursday. The radar is invisible to a radar that didn't even exist when the plane was built. It is a machine designed to evolve faster than the enemy can think. We weren't just building a bomber, Vance would say during a closed-door briefing. We were building a growing brain. But the true magic, the kind that makes the hair on the back of a general's neck stand up, is the secret of the spectral skin. For 20 years, the talk of the town was radar cross-section. Everyone wanted to make the plane's signature as small as possible. The B-2, famously, has the radar signature of a large bird. What the B-21 did was move beyond the bird. The truth was, the engineers realized that in an era of multispectral sensors, radars that use different frequencies, infrared trackers that look for heat, and acoustic sensors that listen for vibration, just being small wasn't enough. You had to be a ghost across the entire spectrum. The B-21 skin is a masterpiece of modern alchemy, a composite material that doesn't just bounce radar waves away, it absorbs them, transforms them, and hides the heat of the engines so perfectly that the plane can fly through a sensor-rich environment as if it were a shadow moving through a dark room. The teaching pause here is crucial. In the past, stealth was a shape. If you looked at the plane from the wrong angle, it might pop up on radar. But the radar uses its digital brain to constantly adjust its profile and its electronic emissions. It talks to the radar of the enemy, whispering back a lie that says, "There is nothing here." It doesn't just evade the wall, it convinces the wall that it doesn't exist. Inside the factory in Palmdale, the production line looked more like a cleanroom for microchips than a traditional aircraft plant. There was no noise of heavy machinery. Instead, there was the precision of robotic arms laying down ribbons of carbon fiber with the delicacy of a master weaver. The technicians, men and women who had sworn oaths of silence reaching back generations, worked under the constant gaze of high-definition cameras that tracked every movement to ensure that not a single millimeter was out of place. They were building the ultimate deterrent, a mechanism that served as a metaphor for the American industrial edge. While our adversaries were struggling to copy the designs of our old planes, we were moving into a dimension they hadn't even mapped yet. The radar was becoming a software-defined predator, a digital ghost draped in a physical shroud of spectral gray. As the first test airframe took shape, the skepticism of the outside world began to look more and more like a tactical advantage. Let them think it's just another expensive bomber. Let them believe that their new stealth-killing radars have won the race. Because the beauty of the B-21 is that even when it's sitting right in front of you on the tarmac, you aren't seeing the real plane. You're seeing the version we've allowed you to see. The version that fights, the one that loiters over your high command headquarters while you're still checking your satellite feeds, that version is something no camera will ever capture. America wasn't just building a weapon. We were building a nightmare for anyone who thought they had finally mastered the sky. And somewhere in the silence of the digital cloud, the radar was already practicing its first mission. November 10, 2023. Palmdale, California. The sky is a bruise-colored purple, the first light of a winter dawn just beginning to bleed over the jagged peaks of the San Gabriel Mountains. It is a morning of absolute crystal-clear stillness, the kind of weather pilots call severe clear. On the runway at Plant 42, a small group of personnel stands in the tall, wind-silvered grass, their eyes fixed on a shape that shouldn't belong in the sunlight. Lieutenant Colonel Joshua Wolf Renard, a veteran of the B-2 program and a man with ice water in his veins, is sitting in the cockpit of the first B-21 Raider ever to feel the kiss of the morning air. Behind him, the engines are spooling up. But there is no roar. There is no thundering vibration that rattles the windows of the nearby hangars. Instead, there is only a low, haunting whisper, a sound like the rushing of air through a deep canyon. It is the sound of a machine that has been designed to treat the atmosphere not as an obstacle, but as a partner. As Renard pushes the throttles forward and the Raider begins its takeoff roll, the world is watching. Literally. Not just the thousands of planespotters lined up outside the fence with long-range lenses, but the multi-billion-dollar satellite constellations of every rival power on Earth. They were all tuned to this exact coordinate, waiting to see the billion-dollar shadow in motion for the first time. What they didn't know, and what they were about to realize with a cold sinking sensation was that seeing the plane with your eyes and seeing it with your weapons are two very different things. The plan was simple: a short hop from Palmdale to Edwards Air Force Base. In any other test flight, the plane would be followed by a swarm of chase planes, F-16s and F-35s designed to monitor its performance. But as the Raider climbed into the thin desert air, the chase pilots encountered a problem that wasn't in the mission briefing. At certain angles, even with the B-21 sitting right in front of them, their radars were struggling to maintain a lock. The F-16s, equipped with some of the best sensors in the world, were looking at a ghost. The truth was, the B-21 wasn't just hiding from the radar, it was eating the radar. The teaching pause in this moment is what separates the Raider from every other aircraft in history. Most stealth planes use passive materials to hide. But the B-21 has an active electronic skin that manages its signature in real time. Think of it like a mirror that doesn't just reflect what's in front of it, but projects a different image altogether. While the world's satellites were looking for a massive flying wing, the Raider's digital brain was feeding back a signature that looked like a pocket of turbulent air or a flock of migratory birds. As Renard leveled off at 30,000 feet, he could see the curvature of the Earth beginning to glow with the rising sun. He was flying the ultimate irony. To the naked eye, he was a massive, majestic aircraft, arguably one of the most visible things in the sky. But to the trillion-dollar defense networks of the world, networks designed to detect a missile launch from halfway across the globe, he simply didn't exist. This was the enemy's realization. Somewhere in a hardened command center thousands of miles away, an officer was looking at a high-resolution satellite feed of the California desert. He could see the Raider's shadow on the sand. He could see the heat shimmer from the engines. But when he looked at his integrated air defense monitor, the screen that actually tells his missiles where to fire, there was nothing. Just a flat, blue expanse of empty sky. It was a moment of profound, systemic shock. For 20 years, our adversaries had told their people that America was a declining power, that our technology was stagnant, and that the age of the bomber was over. They had built their entire military strategy around the idea that they could see us coming. They believed that by layering radar on top of radar, and satellite on top of satellite, they had created a net we could never slip through. But as the Raider touched down on the dry lake bed at Edwards, it became clear that the net was broken. What they had just witnessed wasn't just a successful test flight. It was a demonstration of a new kind of strategic dominance. Unlike the B-2, which is a sprint weapon, designed to strike and then retreat to its climate-controlled sanctuary, the B-21 is built for the long loiter. It is designed to sit in the enemy's backyard for hours, or even days, using its persistent stealth and its vast array of sensors to map out every movement, every communication, and every secret of the target. They thought we were bringing a bomb. They realized we were bringing a permanent overseer. As Renard climbed down the ladder and felt the solid ground beneath his boots, he looked back at the aircraft. It was already being swarmed by technicians, but it looked remarkably clean, as if it hadn't even worked hard. The Raider hadn't just survived its first contact with the world, it had fundamentally altered the world's understanding of what is possible. America hadn't just built a plane that could hide. We had built a plane that could stay. And when you have a ghost that never leaves, the very concept of a safe harbor disappears. The power of the B-21 Raider doesn't lie in its ability to drop a single bomb or outrun a single missile. Its true dominance is systemic. It is the hub of a wheel that is currently crushing the strategic ambitions of every near-peer adversary on the planet. To see this in action, you have to look past the aircraft itself and into the digital thread that connects a factory worker in Palmdale named Sarah Jennings to a pilot over the South China Sea. Sarah is part of a new generation of American industrial might. She doesn't use a heavy torque wrench. She uses a tablet and a pair of augmented reality glasses that overlay a digital blueprint onto the composite frame of the Raider. Because the B-21 was built with a digital twin from day one, Sarah can see through the skin of the aircraft, ensuring that every fiber optic cable is placed with sub-millimeter precision. But here is the irony that the critics missed. They said the B-21 was too high-tech to ever be affordable. They looked at the B-2 Spirit, a plane so expensive we could only afford 21 of them, and assumed the Raider would suffer the same fate. The truth was exactly the opposite. You see, the B-21 was designed for producibility. By using digital manufacturing and open software architecture, the Air Force has done something that was previously thought impossible. They've created a sixth-generation, invisible aircraft that can be mass-produced. We aren't building 20 of these. We are building at least 100, and perhaps many more. And because the brain of the plane is modular, we don't have to rebuild the whole aircraft to keep it relevant. This is America's industrial edge in the 21st century. Not just the ability to forge steel, but the ability to mass-produce complexity. But even more terrifying for our enemies is the Raider's role as the quarterback of the sky. The teaching pause here is vital for understanding modern warfare. In the past, a bomber was a lonely hunter. It flew into the dark, dropped its payload, and prayed it wasn't seen. The B-21, however, is never alone. It is part of what the Pentagon calls a family of systems. As it loiters invisibly in enemy airspace, it acts as a massive airborne server. It is linked to collaborative combat aircraft, loyal wingman drones that it controls from its cockpit. What this means on the battlefield is a complete breakdown of enemy logic. Imagine an integrated air defense commander. His radar is screaming with the signatures of 20 small, aggressive drones that are jamming his signals and targeting his missile sites. He fires his precious missiles to kill the drones, thinking he's won the battle. What he doesn't know, what he will never know until it's too late, is that the B-21 was sitting right above him the whole time. It was the one telling the drones where to fly. It was the one gathering his radar frequencies and sending them back to a carrier strike group 1,000 miles away. The Raider isn't just a shooter, it's a sensor, a relay, and a commander all rolled into one. It turns the entire theater of war into its own personal chessboard. This is what systemic dominance looks like. It's the realization that you aren't fighting a plane, you're fighting an entire nation's digital infrastructure. While our adversaries are still trying to figure out how to make their stealth coatings stay on in the rain, America has moved into a reality where the plane itself is almost secondary to the network it carries. We are building these things in the shadows, using the same digital thread to ensure that the 10th Raider is exactly as perfect as the 100th. This consistency is the death knell for any hope of a technological catch-up. The strategic edge here is one of inevitable mathematics. If you have 5 ghosts, you have a problem. If you have 100 ghosts that can talk to each other, share data instantly, and loiter over your capital for 12 hours at a time, you don't have a problem, you have an existential threat. This is why the B-21 is the ultimate deterrent. It proves that America's reach isn't just long, it's ubiquitous. It is the silent, pervasive oversight that makes the very idea of starting a war seem like an act of suicide. Sarah Jennings, as she inspects the wing of a Raider in the Palmdale sunlight, isn't just an assembly worker. She is a guardian. Each layer of composite she checks, each digital signature she verifies, adds another link to a chain that holds the world's most aggressive regimes at bay. The billion-dollar shadow was a nickname meant to mock us. But in the cold, hard light of the 2020s, it has become a promise. A promise that no matter how many walls you build, or how many satellites you launch, the shadow of American power is already there. And it isn't leaving. 30 years from now, a young man will stand on the flight line at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota, his face illuminated by the pale, cold light of a winter moon. He will be looking at the same spectral shape that Chief Master Sergeant Robert Henderson saw in the desert so many years ago. But by then, the B-21 Raider won't be a new revelation, it will be the silent architect of an era of peace that the world took for granted. The legacy of the billion-dollar shadow isn't measured in the craters of a battlefield or the wreckage of an enemy fleet. Its true legacy is the absence of those things. It is the wars that never started, the invasions that stayed on the drawing board, and the dictators who looked at their radar screens, saw nothing, and decided that today was not the day to test the resolve of the United States. There is a profound, almost spiritual irony in the existence of the Raider. We have spent billions of dollars, employed hundreds of thousands of the world's most brilliant minds, and pushed the very boundaries of physics to build something that we hope never has to fire a shot. We built a machine of absolute terrifying power so that we would never have to use it. That is the American way of war, a strength so overwhelming and so invisible that it makes the very idea of conflict obsolete. The truth was, the B-21 didn't just replace the B-1 or the B-2. It replaced the very definition of a border. In the 20th century, a nation was defined by its walls, by its geography, its mountains, and its air defenses. But as the Raider slipped into the 21st century, it proved that walls no longer exist. Not for us. When you can exist in an enemy's most secure airspace for hours without ever being detected, the concept of sovereignty for an aggressor becomes a polite fiction. You realize that you only exist because the silent guardian in the sky has allowed you to. You see, the Raider is a metaphor for the American spirit itself. It is quiet, it is resilient, and it is a master of the invisible forces that move the world. From the Wright brothers on the dunes of Kitty Hawk to the engineers in the digital clouds of Palmdale, there is a straight line of restless, relentless innovation. We have always been a people who looked at the horizon and saw not a limit, but a starting line. When the world said we couldn't hide a bomber in the age of satellites, we didn't argue. We just went to work. We didn't fight the physics, we owned them. As the raider banks away from the lights of the city and vanishes into the darkness of the high atmosphere, it leaves no trail. There is no roar. No heat. Just a ripple in the fabric of the night. It is the ultimate expression of our will, a machine that says we will go where we must, stay as long as we are needed, and return home in total unbreakable silence. Some call it a weapon. Some call it an expense. But to those who understand the weight of history, the B-21 is a testament. It is a testament to 300 million people who refused to accept that the world had grown too small or too dangerous for freedom to breathe. It is a reminder that while ideologies may fade and empires may crumble, the physics of American engineering and the math of American resolve are constants in an uncertain universe. In the silence after the raider has passed, the wind over the desert returns to its natural state. The radars continue their sweep, the satellites continue their orbit, and the world goes back to sleep, unaware that its safety was just verified by a ghost they will never see. The experts were right about one thing: the age of the bomber as they knew it is over. It has been replaced by something far more enduring. It wasn't luck. It was physics, precision, and 300 million people who refused to lose. They said it was impossible. The wreckage of their misconceptions disagreed. And that was the night the American century signed its name across the sky, in exhaust trails and empty radar screens.